The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Llano, Texas, sending up a cloud of dust that coated everything within 10 feet. And Natalie Zimmerman grabbed her grandmother's arm to steady the older woman as they prepared to step into their new life in this wild frontier town in the year 1878. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs as she peered through the dusty window at the small collection of weathered buildings that made up the main street. This was nothing like Boston. Nothing like the cobblestone streets and brick buildings she had known all her life. But Boston held nothing for her anymore. Not after her father's business had collapsed and creditors had seized everything. When the advertisement for a mail-order bride had appeared in the newspaper, requesting a woman willing to relocate to Texas, she had responded out of desperation more than hope. The driver opened the door and offered his gloved hand. Natalie stepped down first, her legs wobbly from 3 days of constant travel. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she immediately felt perspiration forming under her high collar. Then she turned to help her grandmother, Esther Zimmerman, who moved with careful dignity despite her 70 years. "Well," Esther said, looking around with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, "it certainly is different from Massachusetts." "That's putting it kindly, grandmother," Natalie murmured, smoothing her travel-worn skirts. She was acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. A man in dusty work clothes paused on the wooden sidewalk to gawk. 2 women carrying baskets whispered to each other behind gloved hands. "Miss Zimmerman." A deep voice spoke from behind them. Natalie spun around and found herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He held his hat in his hands, revealing dark brown hair that was slightly too long. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. His shirt was clean but worn, and his boots showed the marks of hard use. "Yes, I'm Natalie Zimmerman," she said, proud that her voice came out steady. "James Thatcher. I'm pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman." His gaze shifted to Esther and something flickered in his expression. Concern, confusion. "And this is my grandmother, Esther Zimmerman." Natalie lifted her chin slightly, bracing herself for the reaction she had feared since they had left Boston. "I know I didn't mention her in my letters. I apologize for the deception, but I couldn't leave her behind. She has no one else and I'm all she has. If this arrangement won't work because of her presence, I understand, but we come as a pair. I won't abandon her." James stood silent for a long moment, and Natalie felt her heart sinking. They had used nearly every penny they had for the train tickets and the stagecoach fare. If he sent them away, they would be stranded here with no resources and no way to return home. Not that they had a home to return to. Then James did something unexpected. He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and genuine. "She's welcome here as family too." Esther's sharp intake of breath matched Natalie's own surprise. "Truly?" Natalie asked, searching his face for any sign of reluctance or insincerity. "Truly," James confirmed. He turned to Esther and gave her a small bow. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I'd be honored to have you in my home. A ranch can always use someone with experience and wisdom. My own grandmother passed 5 years back, and I've missed having that presence around." Esther's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Thatcher. Please call me James." He gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "Your trunks should be unloaded shortly. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I hope the trip wasn't too difficult." As they waited for the luggage, James explained that his ranch covered 2,000 acres of grazing land. He ran cattle primarily, with some horses. He employed 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. His main house had 3 bedrooms, which he acknowledged was modest but comfortable. "I built it myself 4 years ago," he said, helping to load their trunks onto the wagon. After my father passed, I inherited the land. My mother had died when I was young and I never had any siblings. It's been lonely, I'll admit. That's why I placed the advertisement. Natalie studied him as he worked. His movements were efficient and strong. He treated their belongings with care, making sure nothing was stacked too heavily. When Esther tried to climb up onto the wagon bench, he was there immediately, offering his arm for support. "Thank you, young man," Esther said. "You have good manners." "My grandmother insisted on it," James replied with a slight smile. "She would take a switch to me even when I was 16 if I forgot to help a lady with her chair or failed to remove my hat indoors." "A wise woman," Esther declared. Natalie climbed up beside her grandmother, and James took the reins. As they rolled out of town, Natalie tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had expected to meet a stranger and somehow build a life with him. That prospect had terrified her enough. But James seemed kind, respectful, and genuinely welcoming. Could it really be this straightforward? Or was she missing something? The landscape rolled past, golden grassland dotted with mesquite trees and rocky outcroppings. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, so much bigger than it had ever seemed in Boston. Hawks circled on the updrafts, and in the distance, Natalie could see what she assumed were cattle, small dark shapes against the pale grass. "It's beautiful," she said, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. "In a stark way." "It grows on you," James said. "The first year I was out here, all I could think about was how empty it felt. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. There's freedom in all this space." "Boston felt very crowded," Natalie admitted, "especially toward the end. Your letters mentioned your father's business failing. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." She didn't elaborate. The shame of those final months still burned too fresh. The way their supposed friends had turned away. The way creditors had stripped their home bare. The way her father had aged 10 years in 10 months before his heart had given out. Esther patted her hand, and Natalie was grateful for the silent support. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically. Then James pointed ahead. "There. That's the ranch." The house sat on a slight rise, a solid wooden structure with a covered porch running along the front. It wasn't large, but it looked well built and cared for. Nearby stood a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and what must be the bunkhouse. Fences stretched out in geometric patterns, containing different pastures. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze. "It's lovely," Esther said approvingly. "You keep it neat." "Try to," James said. "A ranch falls apart quickly if you let things slide." As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He was older than James, perhaps in his 40s, with a weathered face and a cautious expression. "That's Cole Martinez," James said quietly. "He's been with me since the beginning. Good man. The other 2 hands are out checking the south fence line, but you'll meet them at supper." James helped both women down from the wagon, then introduced them properly to Cole, who touched his hat brim respectfully but didn't say much. He did offer to unload the trunks, which James accepted gratefully. The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace at one end and a cook stove at the other. Sturdy furniture filled the space, clearly handmade and practical rather than decorative. Everything was clean but had a distinctly masculine, sparse quality. "The 2 bedrooms on the left are yours," James said, opening doors to show them. Each room contained a bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a small chest. Simple curtains hung at the windows. "I'm on the right side. There's a pump in the kitchen and there's an outhouse about 50 feet behind the house. I know it's not fancy." "It's perfect," Natalie said firmly and meant it. Compared to the cramped rented room she and Esther had shared in Boston these last months, these rooms were a palace. "I'll let you settle in," James said. "Supper's usually at 6. I'm not much of a cook, fair warning. The hands and I tend to make simple fare." After he left, closing the front door behind him, Natalie and Esther looked at each other. "Well," Esther said softly, "he seems like a good man." "He does," Natalie agreed, sinking down onto the bed in what was now her room. The mattress was firm but not uncomfortable. "I can hardly believe our luck, grandmother. I was so afraid he would turn us away. I told you to have faith." Esther sat beside her, taking her hand. "You're a good girl, Natalie. You deserve kindness." "I need to make this work," Natalie said urgently. "We have nowhere else to go." "Then we'll make ourselves useful. A ranch this size with only men running it. I guarantee they need help. And not just with cooking, though I suspect that's true too." They spent the next hour unpacking their meager belongings. Natalie had sold nearly everything before leaving Boston, keeping only clothes, a few books, her mother's jewelry, and practical items. Esther had even less. But now they had rooms of their own, safety, and apparently a man willing to give them a chance. As 6 o'clock approached, Natalie changed into a fresh dress and tidied her hair as best she could. Esther did the same. They emerged from their rooms to find James at the stove, frying something that smelled like beef and onions. The front door opened and 3 men filed in, removing their hats. Mrs. Zimmerman," James said. "These are my other hands, Miguel Garcia and Thomas Sullivan." Miguel was young, perhaps barely 20, with an easy smile. Thomas was somewhere in his 30s, stocky and red-haired. Both men mumbled polite greetings, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden presence of women. "Pleased to meet you," Natalie said warmly. "Please call me Natalie, and this is Esther." Supper was awkward but not unpleasant. The food was edible if uninspired, the portions generous. The men ate quickly and efficiently, making little conversation. Natalie learned that Cole and his wife had run a small farm in Missouri before drought drove them out. Thomas had come from Ireland 10 years ago. Miguel had grown up in Texas, his family having lived in the region for generations. After the meal, the 3 hands excused themselves to the bunkhouse. James began clearing the table, but Esther stopped him with a raised hand. "Natalie and I will handle the cleaning," she said firmly. "You've worked all day." "So have you, traveling," James protested. "Traveling means sitting." "Trust me, after 3 days of that, I'm ready to move around." Esther was already gathering plates. "Go on now, rest or do whatever you need to do." James looked at Natalie, who nodded. "She's right. We're not guests, James. This is our home now if you'll have us. We need to contribute." Something shifted in James's expression, a tension releasing. "All right, thank you. I'll be on the porch if you need anything." As Natalie and Esther washed dishes in the large basin, using water heated on the stove, Natalie found herself processing everything that had happened. This morning she had woken up in a stagecoach, exhausted and terrified. Now she was washing dishes in a ranch house in Texas, preparing to begin a marriage with a man she had just met. "He's handsome," Esther observed quietly. "Grandmother," Natalie felt her cheeks heat. "What?" "I'm old, not blind, and more importantly, he seems honorable. That matters more than looks, but it doesn't hurt." Esther handed her another plate to dry. "I see how he looks at you too. He barely knows me. Doesn't mean he can't admire what he sees." Esther smiled. "You're a beautiful girl, Natalie, and you have your mother's kind heart. Any man would be lucky to have you." Natalie didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought much about her appearance. She knew she was reasonably pretty, with dark hair and light eyes that came from her father's side of the family. But beauty had seemed irrelevant these past months when survival was the only thing that mattered, When the dishes were done and the kitchen tidied, Natalie ventured out onto the porch. James sat in a rocking chair, looking out over his land. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Esther's gone to bed already," Natalie said. "The travel wore her out more than she wants to admit." "She seems like a tough woman," James said, gesturing to the other rocking chair. "Please sit." Natalie settled into the chair, grateful for the cooling evening air. For a few minutes they rocked in silence, watching the colors deepen and fade. "I should tell you," James finally said, "that I don't expect anything from you right away. I know this is all very sudden. I thought about it a lot before you arrived, what would be fair. You're here, you're safe, and that's what matters. The rest we can figure out as we go." Relief flooded through Natalie. She had been dreading this conversation, uncertain what would be expected of her tonight. "Thank you. I want to be a good wife to you, James. Truly I do, but I'm grateful for time to adjust." "We'll have a proper ceremony in town once you're settled," James continued. "I've already spoken to the preacher. I know we're strangers, but I believe in doing things right." "So do I." Natalie looked at him in the fading light. "Can I ask you something? Anything?" "Why did you place the advertisement? You seem perfectly capable of managing on your own." James was quiet for a moment, rocking slowly. "Capable isn't the same as happy," he finally said. "This ranch, it's everything I worked for. But at the end of the day, when I come back to this house, there's nothing but silence. I eat alone, sleep alone, wake up alone. I'm only 29 and I felt like I was halfway to the grave already. I wanted more than that. I wanted a partner, someone to build a life with, not just a livelihood." His honesty touched something deep in Natalie's chest. "I understand that. After my father died, the loneliness was almost worse than the poverty. Grandmother and I had each other, but we had lost everything else. All our friends, our home, our position in society. It was like we had become invisible." "You're not invisible here," James said softly. "I see you." Those simple words brought unexpected tears to Natalie's eyes. She blinked them back quickly, turning her face away. "I'm sorry," James said immediately. "I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't." "I mean you did, but in a good way." She gave a shaky laugh. "It's been a long time since anyone really looked at me and saw a person instead of a problem or a burden." "You're not a burden, Natalie. Neither is Esther." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I mean what I said. You're both welcome here, and I hope in time you'll come to think of this as home." "I think we already do," Natalie admitted. They sat together until full darkness fell and the stars emerged in overwhelming profusion across the vast Texas sky. Finally, exhaustion claimed Natalie, and she excused herself to bed. James wished her good night with a gentleness that made her feel safe in a way she had forgotten was possible. In her room, she changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. Through the window, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle, the chirping of crickets, and the occasional creak of the house settling. Strange sounds, but not unpleasant. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself thinking about James's eyes and the way he had looked at her grandmother with such immediate acceptance. Whatever happened next, she was determined to make this work, for Esther's sake, and increasingly for her own. The next morning, Natalie woke to the sound of roosters crowing and boots thumping on the wooden porch. Sunlight streamed through her window, far brighter than any morning light in Boston. She dressed quickly in a practical work dress and found Esther already in the kitchen, examining the pantry contents with a critical eye. "The man has flour, beans, salt pork, and not much else," Esther announced. "When someone goes to town next, we need to get proper supplies. Some vegetables at minimum. These men probably haven't eaten a green thing in months." James emerged from his room looking slightly sheepish. "I heard that. You're not wrong." "Do you have a vegetable garden?" Esther asked. "Had one 2 years back. It died when I couldn't keep up with it." James poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "There's a good spot on the east side of the house. Gets morning sun and some afternoon shade." "Then that's where we'll start," Esther declared. "Natalie and I can manage a garden, and I'll take over the cooking if you don't mind." "No offense intended, but I suspect I have more experience with it." "None taken," James said with a smile. "I'd be grateful. The hands will be too, though they're too polite to say the cooking's been rough." Over breakfast, a simple meal of biscuits and gravy that Esther whipped up from the limited ingredients, they discussed the practical arrangements. James explained the ranch routine. He and the hands worked from sunup to sundown most days, checking cattle, mending fences, managing water sources, and handling the thousand small tasks that kept a ranch running. In a few weeks, they would drive part of the herd to market in Austin, a journey that would take several days. "I'll need to make a list for town," Natalie said. "Beyond just food supplies, do you have paper?" James produced a stub of pencil and some paper from a drawer. "What else do you need?" "Fabric, thread, buttons," Natalie began. "Your curtains are serviceable but thin. And I noticed some of the dish towels are worn through. If we're going to establish a real household, we need proper supplies." "Get whatever you think is necessary," James said. "I'm heading to town this afternoon to handle some business with the bank. You could come along, pick out what you need yourself." "I'd like that," Natalie said. "Grandmother, will you be all right here?" "I'll be fine," Esther said. "I'll start planning that garden and maybe clean this kitchen properly." "No offense, James, but I don't think these shelves have seen a good scrubbing in some time." "Probably not," James admitted without embarrassment. "I'll make sure one of the hands is around if you need anything heavy moved." That afternoon, Natalie found herself back on the wagon beside James, heading toward Llano. The journey felt different in daylight, less daunting. She watched the landscape with new eyes, starting to pick out details. The way the grass rippled in the wind like water. The red-tailed hawks perched on fence posts. A group of pronghorn antelope bounding away from the road. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "How did you get started?" James seemed pleased by the question. "My father came out here in the 50s, back when this was still frontier territory. He was from Virginia originally, didn't much care for how things were going there politically. He wanted to build something of his own. He filed a claim, built a small cabin, and started with just a few head of cattle. It was rough going. Apache raids, droughts, the war." "Your father fought in the war." He tried to stay neutral, actually. Didn't believe in the Confederacy's cause, but didn't want to fight his neighbors either. It made things complicated for a while. Some folks around here still remember. James's jaw tightened slightly. "But he was fair in his dealings and he worked hard. Eventually, people judged him by his character rather than his politics." "That must have been difficult," Natalie said softly. "It was, but it taught me that integrity matters more than popularity." James glanced at her. "What about your family? You mentioned your father's business failed, but what kind of business was it?" "Importing," Natalie said. "Fine goods from Europe. For a while it was very successful. We had a beautiful home, a staff, social standing. Then the economy shifted, and father made some investments that didn't pan out. He borrowed money to cover the losses, certain he could recover, but he couldn't. It all collapsed very quickly. That must have been terrifying." "It was humiliating," Natalie said bluntly. "Watching everything being carried out of our house by creditors while neighbors watched and whispered. Going from being invited to every social event to being invisible overnight. Father couldn't bear it. His heart gave out from the stress." James reached over and briefly squeezed her hand. The gesture was simple, but conveyed more sympathy than 1,000 words. In town, James conducted his business at the bank while Natalie visited the general store. The proprietor, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, showed immediate interest in the new arrival. "So you're James Thatcher's mail-order bride," she said, not unkindly. "Welcome to Llano. It's good that boy is finally settling down. He's been alone too long." "Thank you," Natalie said, choosing to ignore the nosiness. "I need quite a few supplies." She spent a pleasant hour selecting fabric, thread, seeds for the garden, proper cooking supplies, and various household necessities. Mrs. Henderson proved helpful once she got past her initial curiosity, suggesting which seeds grew best in the Texas climate and which merchants in town could provide other services. "There's a seamstress 2 doors down if you need anything made up," Mrs. Henderson said. "And the doctor's office is on the corner. Preacher's house is behind the church on 3rd Street. When James collected her, the wagon bed was notably fuller. He raised an eyebrow at the quantity but didn't comment, just loaded everything securely. On the way back to the ranch, Natalie said, "Everyone in town seems to know you." "Small town," James said with a shrug. "Most of us know each other. They're good people mostly. A bit nosy, but they'll come through if you need help. Mrs. Henderson seems very interested in our arrangement." "I'm sure the whole town's talking," James said wryly. "A mail-order bride is big news around here. The fact that you brought your grandmother probably has them all fascinated." "Does it bother you, the talk?" "No, let them talk. We know our business and that's what matters." He paused. "Does it bother you?" "I've had enough of worrying about what people think," Natalie said firmly. "It gets you nowhere except miserable." James laughed, a genuine sound of delight. "I think you're going to fit in just fine here, Natalie Zimmerman." Back at the ranch, they found Esther had been true to her word. The kitchen sparkled, shelves organized with military precision. She had also somehow convinced Cole to help her turn over the soil in the garden plot, and the older cowhand was looking distinctly pleased with himself when they arrived. "Your grandmother is a force of nature," James murmured to Natalie as they watched Esther directing Miguel and Thomas in moving some wooden planks for a garden border. "You have no idea," Natalie replied affectionately. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Esther took over the kitchen completely, transforming the bland meals into proper food. Natalie helped with cooking but also began tackling other household tasks, mending clothes, properly organizing the linen closet, sewing new curtains, and gradually making the house feel like a home rather than just a shelter. She also began learning about the ranch. James seemed pleased by her interest and took time to explain things. She learned to identify the different cattle, to understand the importance of water sources in this dry climate, to recognize the signs of healthy versus sick animals. She watched him work with quiet competence, respected by his men and clearly knowledgeable about every aspect of ranching, and she found herself increasingly drawn to him. The way he moved with unconscious grace, the patience he showed with a difficult horse, the gentleness in his hands despite their strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which he was doing more often now that the house had life in it. 2 weeks after her arrival, James drove them all to town for the wedding ceremony. It was a simple affair at the small church, with Esther, the 3 ranch hands, and Mrs. Henderson and her husband as witnesses. The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson, kept the service short and dignified. When James slipped the simple gold band onto Natalie's finger, his hand was steady. When he kissed her at the preacher's instruction, it was brief and chaste, but Natalie felt warmth spread through her entire body. "Mrs. Thatcher," James said softly, and she realized it was true. She was married now, for better or worse. The small gathering had a meal at the town's only restaurant, a celebratory dinner that felt more comfortable than Natalie had expected. The hands clearly approved of her, and Esther was in her element, making everyone laugh with stories from Boston that made their old life seem less tragic and more adventurous in the retelling. That night, back at the ranch, Natalie stood in her room, uncertain. They were married now. Did that change the arrangement? James had been sleeping in his own room since she arrived, giving her space. But surely expectations were different now. A soft knock on her door made her jump. "Come in." James entered, still dressed, looking as uncertain as she felt. "I wanted to talk to you." "All right. Nothing has to change," he said quickly. "Not until you're ready. I meant what I said before. This is about building something together, not about me making demands." Natalie looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had welcomed her grandmother without hesitation, who worked himself to exhaustion every day to maintain this ranch, who had married her knowing almost nothing about her except what she had written in a few letters. "James," she said softly, "I'm ready for this to be a real marriage, if you are." His eyes widened slightly. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain." She stepped closer to him. "You've been patient and kind, but we're married now and I want to start our life together properly. I'm not afraid of you." "I would never want you to be," James said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Natalie, I know we haven't known each other long, but I'm already grateful every day that you answered my advertisement. You've brought light to this place." Then he kissed her properly, deeply, and Natalie felt something inside her unlock. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring weeks of growing affection and trust into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you." "You're not," Natalie assured him. "I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and careful, two people learning each other with patience and growing passion. James was gentle, attentive to her responses, making sure she felt safe and desired. And Natalie discovered that intimacy with someone who truly cared for her well-being was something entirely different from the vague, frightening ideas she had carried. Afterward, lying in James's arms in what had become their room, Natalie felt a peace she hadn't known in years. This was right. This was home. "Are you all right?" James asked softly, stroking her hair. "Better than all right," Natalie said honestly. "I didn't expect to feel like this." "Like what?" "Happy." She tilted her head to look up at him. "Genuinely happy." James smiled and kissed her forehead. "Good, because I'm happy too, happier than I've been in years, maybe ever." They fell asleep tangled together, and when morning came, Natalie woke feeling fundamentally changed. This wasn't just an arrangement anymore. This was a marriage, a real one, and she was determined to make it flourish. Over the following weeks, as spring deepened toward summer, life on the ranch found its rhythm. The garden Esther had planted began to sprout, green shoots pushing up through the dark soil. Natalie discovered she had a talent for working with the chickens James purchased, and soon they had fresh eggs daily. Esther's cooking became the stuff of legend among the ranch hands, who started volunteering for extra chores just to ensure they were around for mealtimes. And Natalie's relationship with James deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. They talked long into the evenings on the porch, sharing their pasts, their dreams, their fears. He told her about growing up lonely on the ranch, about watching his father work himself to exhaustion, about the guilt he felt over being relieved when the old man finally passed and he could run things his own way. She told him about her mother, who had died when Natalie was 15, about the pressure of Boston society and the constant anxiety of never quite measuring up, about the shame and fear of the past year. "You never have to feel ashamed here," James told her one night, holding her close on the porch swing he had hung for her. "The past is done. We're building something new." In early June, they drove part of the herd to Austin for sale. James was gone for 5 days, leaving Cole in charge of the ranch. Natalie surprised herself by how much she missed him, by how empty the house felt without his presence. When he returned, dusty and tired but with a good price for the cattle, she flew into his arms without thinking. "I missed you," she said against his chest. "I missed you too," James replied, holding her tight. "Every night, actually. The ground's not comfortable when you're used to sleeping next to your wife." That night, their reunion was passionate and joyful, and afterward, James said something that made Natalie's heart soar. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's only been a few months, but it's true. I love you, Natalie." "I love you too," she whispered back, realizing as she said it that it was completely true. Somewhere between arriving terrified in Llano and this moment, she had fallen deeply in love with her mail-order husband. July brought scorching heat, and the constant work of ensuring the cattle had adequate water. August was more of the same. Natalie learned to manage the household accounts, discovered she had a knack for treating minor injuries and illnesses that kept them from having to ride to town for the doctor, and slowly became an integral part of the ranch operation, rather than just James's wife. Esther, meanwhile, had become the ranch's unofficial grandmother. She mended clothes, offered advice, settled disputes between the hands, and kept everyone fed. Miguel, who was closest to her in ease of relationship, often sought her out for advice about a girl he was courting in town. "You remind me of my grandmother," he told Esther one evening. "She raised me after my mother died. Same way of seeing straight through to the truth of things." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Esther replied with a smile. In September, Natalie began to suspect something that both thrilled and terrified her. Her monthly courses, usually reliable, had failed to arrive. Her breasts felt tender, and certain smells made her nauseated. She waited another week before saying anything, but when the signs continued, she approached James one evening after supper. "I need to tell you something," she said, her heart pounding. James immediately looked concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think so." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think I'm pregnant." For a moment, James just stared at her. Then his face transformed with joy so pure it brought tears to Natalie's eyes. "Truly?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm fairly certain. All the signs are there." James pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could hardly breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't cover it," James said, pulling back to look at her with shining eyes. "Natalie, you've given me everything. A home, love, and now a family. I never imagined I could be this blessed." When they told Esther, the older woman's reaction was equally emotional. "A great-grandchild," she said wonderingly. "Oh, my dear girl, your mother would be so happy." The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor on their next trip to town. Natalie was healthy and strong, and if all went well, the baby would arrive in March. The entire ranch celebrated the news. Cole carved a beautiful cradle from oak wood. Miguel's girlfriend, Maria, began knitting tiny garments. Thomas, who turned out to be handy with woodworking, started building a rocking chair. As Natalie's belly grew through the fall and into winter, James became almost comically protective. He didn't want her lifting anything heavy, riding horses, or working too hard. Natalie tolerated it with amusement because she knew it came from love. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him repeatedly. "I know, but I can't help it," James replied. "You're carrying our child. I want to make sure you're both safe." Winter in Texas was milder than anything Natalie had experienced in Boston, but there were still cold days and occasional frosts. The ranch slowed down somewhat, and they spent more time indoors. James used the opportunity to teach Natalie to play chess, which she picked up quickly. Esther taught him some complicated card games she knew. In the evenings, they would sit around the fireplace, talking and laughing, and Natalie marveled at how far they had all come. Christmas was a revelation. They went to town for the church service, and afterward, the community held a gathering at the town hall. Natalie had worried about being an outsider, but instead found herself warmly welcomed. The women of Llano, initially wary of the mail-order bride, had softened as word spread about how well she and Esther had fit into the community. Mrs. Henderson even apologized for being so nosy initially. "We're just protective of our own," she explained. "James is a good man. We wanted to make sure you were good people too." "And," Natalie asked, "and you are, you and your grandmother both, you're welcome here." It was a simple statement, but it meant the world. Natalie realized she finally belonged somewhere again. Not because of money or social position, but because of character and effort. Back at the ranch, they exchanged simple gifts. James gave Natalie a beautiful shawl he had commissioned from a weaver in town. She gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, fitted perfectly to his frame. Esther received warm slippers and a new woolen coat. They gave her a comfortable chair with extra cushioning and a footstool. As January turned to February, Natalie grew larger and more uncomfortable. James moved with gentle concern through these days, making sure she had everything she needed. He would rub her aching back, help her with her shoes when she could no longer reach her feet, and tell her constantly how beautiful she looked, even when she felt like an ungainly cow. "I'm enormous," she complained one evening, looking down at her massive belly. "You're perfect," James corrected, placing his hand on her stomach and feeling the baby move. "You're growing our child. That's the most beautiful thing in the world." In early March, on a warm spring day that felt like a gift after the winter months, Natalie's labor began. They had prepared as well as they could, with Esther standing ready to assist, and James prepared to ride for the doctor if needed. But the labor, while long and difficult, progressed normally. Esther proved invaluable, her calm presence and experience helping Natalie through the pain. James stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. "You're so strong," he told her. "You're doing so well. I love you so much." Finally, as the sun set in glorious shades of orange and red, their son was born. A healthy baby boy with a strong cry and a full head of dark hair. "A son," James said in wonder, holding the tiny, squirming bundle with extreme care. "We have a son, Natalie." "He's perfect," Natalie said tiredly, reaching up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Joseph Michael Thatcher. Joseph for James's father and Michael for Natalie's. Little Joseph was welcomed into the world with joy and celebration. The ranch hands came by one at a time to see the baby, each looking uncomfortable but pleased, offering awkward congratulations. Maria, Miguel's girlfriend, who had been courting for months now, came by with her mother, bringing food and baby clothes. The women of Llano organized a rotation to help Natalie in the first weeks, bringing meals and assistance. James proved to be a devoted father, eager to help despite his inexperience. He would walk the floor with Joseph when the baby was fussy, sing to him in a surprisingly pleasant voice, and stare at him for long minutes as if memorizing every detail. "I never knew I could love like this," he told Natalie one night as they watched Joseph sleep in the beautiful cradle Cole had made. "First you, now him. My heart feels too full sometimes." "I know exactly what you mean," Natalie replied, leaning against her husband's shoulder. As spring progressed into summer, they adjusted to life with a baby. Joseph was a relatively easy child, healthy and happy. He would gurgle contentedly while Natalie worked in the garden, now expanded significantly under Esther's direction. The older woman doted on her great-grandson, singing him old songs and telling him stories even though he was far too young to understand. In July, when Joseph was 4 months old, Miguel approached James with a request. He wanted to marry Maria and wondered if there might be a place for them on the ranch. "I've been thinking," James said that evening to Natalie. "The ranch is growing. We're doing well. I could use another permanent hand, especially one I trust like Miguel. What would you think about building another small house, something for them to start their life in?" "I think it's a wonderful idea," Natalie said. "And Maria and I have become friends. I'd love to have her nearby." So they built a small cottage about 100 yards from the main house. It was just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was sturdy and well made. Miguel and Maria married in August, and James gave Miguel a small percentage stake in the ranch as a wedding gift, making him a junior partner rather than just a hired hand. "You've been loyal and hardworking," James told him. "This ranch is growing because of men like you. You deserve to share in its success." Miguel was overcome with gratitude, and Maria cried happy tears. Their little cottage became a second home for Natalie, and the 2 young women grew close as they navigated marriage and soon, pregnancy together. Maria announced she was expecting in September, just a few months after Natalie. "Our children will grow up together," Maria said happily. "They'll be like cousins." As Joseph grew from infant to baby, reaching for things, learning to sit up, and eventually crawling around the house at high speed, the ranch continued to prosper. James made smart decisions about breeding, gradually improving his herd. He bought better bulls, kept careful records, and built a reputation for quality cattle. Money wasn't abundant, but it was steady, and they lived comfortably. The following spring, when Joseph was just past a year old, Natalie realized she was pregnant again. James's reaction was, if possible, even more joyful than the first time. "Another baby," he said, spinning her carefully in his arms. "Natalie, you make me the happiest man alive." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Natalie knew what to expect. She continued working around the house and garden, though James still fussed over her constantly. Joseph kept her busy as he learned to walk and then run, into everything with the fearless curiosity of a toddler. Maria's baby, a girl named Isabel, was born in May, a few months before Natalie's second child was due. The 2 families grew even closer as they shared the joys and challenges of raising small children. In early October, on a cool morning with the first hints of autumn in the air, Natalie gave birth to their second child, a daughter this time. She came into the world with less fanfare than Joseph, arriving quickly and efficiently as if she had places to be. "A girl," Natalie said wonderingly, holding the tiny pink bundle. "We have a daughter, James." "She's beautiful," James said, his voice choked with emotion. "She looks like you." They named her Elena Rose. Elena for Esther's middle name and Rose because Natalie had always loved her mother's rose garden back in Boston. Little Elena was a content baby, happy to observe the world with solemn dark eyes. With 2 young children, life became busier but also richer. Joseph doted on his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. The house rang with laughter and occasional tears, with the chaos of family life. Esther, now 75, had slowed down somewhat but remained sharp and active. She spent her days caring for the children, tending the large garden that now provided much of their food, and generally keeping everyone organized. She was the heart of their little community, beloved by everyone. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. James took on more land, building the herd carefully. Thomas eventually married a widow from town and moved into his own small house on the property. Cole, who had no family of his own, remained in the bunkhouse but became Uncle Cole to all the children. Natalie found her role evolving as the ranch expanded. She kept the books, managed supplies, treated injuries and illnesses with increasing skill, and served as James's trusted advisor on all major decisions. They were true partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was greater than either could have achieved alone. One evening in late summer, when Joseph was 5 and Llano was 3, James and Natalie sat on their porch watching the children play in the yard under Esther's watchful eye. "You ever think about Boston?" James asked. "Do you miss it?" Natalie considered the question carefully. "I miss my parents," she said finally. "I miss who I was before everything fell apart, but the city itself, the life we had there. No, I don't miss it at all. This is my home now. This ranch, this life, you and our children. This is where I belong." James took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I'm glad, because I can't imagine my life without you anymore. You and Esther coming here was the best thing that ever happened to me." "The feeling is mutual," Natalie said softly. "I came here desperate and afraid, expecting at best a tolerable arrangement. Instead, I found love and home and family. I found everything I didn't even know I needed." "Speaking of family," James said with a particular tone that made Natalie look at him suspiciously. "What?" "I've been thinking. The ranch is doing well. We have room in the house. What would you think about another baby?" Natalie laughed. "Are you asking or telling me?" "Asking," James said quickly. "Always asking. But I love being a father and I love our family. If you're willing, I'd like to have more children." "I'm willing," Natalie said, moving to sit on his lap despite being a grown woman. "I love our family too, and honestly, I'd like Llano to have a sister. Being an only daughter can be lonely." James kissed her thoroughly. "Then let's see what happens." What happened was twins. The following summer, on a sweltering July day, Natalie gave birth to 2 more daughters, arriving within minutes of each other. Anna Margaret and Catherine Jane joined the family, and the household erupted into controlled chaos. "4 children," James said, holding one baby while Natalie nursed the other. "We have 4 children, Natalie." "I'm aware," Natalie said dryly, but she was smiling. Despite the exhaustion, despite the overwhelming nature of infant twins, she was happy. The twins thrived, growing into distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Anna was bold and adventurous, while Catherine was thoughtful and careful. Llano adored having baby sisters, and Joseph took his role as big brother seriously, always watching over his siblings. As the children grew, so did the ranch. By the time Joseph was 10, in the year 1891, James had built the operation into one of the most successful ranches in the region. They employed 6 permanent hands now, with additional help hired during busy seasons. The original house had been expanded twice, now a sprawling structure with 8 bedrooms, a proper dining room, and a large kitchen where Esther still reigned supreme despite being 83. Natalie had developed a reputation as a healer, and people would sometimes ride out from town seeking her help with ailments. She had collected a substantial library of medical texts and had become quite knowledgeable. The doctor in Llano often consulted with her on difficult cases. Maria and Miguel's family had grown too. They had 4 children of their own, and the 2 families were inseparably connected. Thomas and his wife had 3 children. Even Cole had eventually married a woman who worked at the general store, and they had a late-life daughter who was the pride of his years. The ranch had become a small community unto itself, a place where people looked out for each other and worked together toward common goals. It was everything James had dreamed of and more. One evening in the fall of 1891, as Natalie and James sat on their porch watching the sunset, a regular ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, James brought up something that had been on his mind. "Joseph will be 11 soon," he said. "He's getting to the age where he needs to start learning the business side of ranching, not just the physical work." "He's been following you around since he could walk," Natalie pointed out. "He already knows more than most grown men. He's a good boy, smart like his mother." James smiled. "I want to make sure he's prepared to take this over someday, but not for a long time yet. I plan to be around to see my grandchildren." "Grandchildren?" Natalie laughed. "Let's get these 4 raised first before you start thinking about the next generation." "Fair enough." James pulled her close. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "This morning, actually, but I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Natalie Thatcher, more than the day I married you, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That's very poetic for a rancher," Natalie teased, but her eyes were soft. "You bring out the poetry in me," James replied, and kissed her as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. As the years continued to pass, the children grew into young adults. Joseph became a skilled rancher under James's tutelage, inheriting his father's fairness and business acumen along with his mother's quick mind. He was being courted by the banker's daughter, a sensible young woman named Sarah who Natalie quite liked. Llano, at 15, had her mother's beauty and her great-grandmother's forthright manner. She had no interest in ranching but loved books and learning. James and Natalie had already decided to send her to a boarding school in San Antonio if she wanted to continue her education. The twins, at 13, were a force of nature. Anna wanted to work on the ranch like her brother, while Catherine had inherited Natalie's healing abilities and spent hours learning everything she could about medicine. Through it all, Esther remained the matriarch of the family, though she was now 90 and increasingly frail. She spent most of her days in her comfortable chair by the fireplace, but her mind was still sharp. The children would gather around her to hear stories of Boston, of the old days, of the journey that had brought her and Natalie to Texas. On a cool evening in March of 1896, Esther called Natalie to her side. "Sit with me, dear girl," she said softly. Natalie sat, taking her grandmother's papery thin hand. "Are you all right, grandmother? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, child, just old," Esther smiled. "I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you, of everything you've built here." "We built it together," Natalie said, her throat tight. "You and me and James. This wouldn't exist without you, perhaps, but you were the brave one, willing to come out here to an unknown future. I just came along for the ride." Esther patted her hand. "I've had a good life, Natalie. The last years especially, watching you flourish, watching your babies grow, I'm content." "Don't talk like that," Natalie said, though she knew what her grandmother was really saying. "Hush now. We both know I'm near the end, but it's all right, I'm ready." Esther's eyes were peaceful. "Promise me you'll keep taking care of this family. Keep loving that good man of yours. Keep building this beautiful life you've created." "I promise," Natalie whispered, tears streaming down her face. Esther passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 nights later, surrounded by the family she had loved so dearly. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Esther had touched so many lives in her years at the ranch that people came from miles around to pay their respects. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch under a large oak tree. The marker read, "Esther Zimmerman, beloved grandmother, 1803–1896. She made a home." Natalie grieved deeply but found comfort in her family. James held her through the dark nights when the loss felt too heavy. The children, now old enough to understand death, mourned their great-grandmother with sincere sorrow. But life continued, as it always does. Joseph married Sarah in a beautiful ceremony the following year. Llano decided to pursue education and left for San Antonio, though she came home for holidays and summers. Anna convinced her father to let her work as a full ranch hand, proving herself as capable as any of the men. Catherine began apprenticing with the doctor in town. And through it all, James and Natalie remained the center of their growing family. Their love had deepened and matured over the years, weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs. They had built not just a successful ranch but a legacy, a place where family and community meant everything. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, James surprised Natalie by taking her on a trip to San Antonio. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together in years. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked the streets hand in hand like young lovers. "Do you remember when we first met?" James asked as they sat in a park, watching the river flow by. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified and determined at the same time." "I was terrified," Natalie admitted. "I had no idea what I was walking into. You could have been anyone. And yet you were brave enough to take the chance, brave enough to bring Esther, knowing I might refuse you both." "I couldn't leave her," Natalie said simply. "She was all I had, and I couldn't turn her away." James took her hand. "I meant it when I said she was welcome as family. I saw the love between you two, and I knew that any woman who would protect her grandmother that fiercely would be worth knowing. You saw all that in those first few minutes." "I saw enough," James said. "And I was right. You've been the best thing in my life, Natalie. Every day with you is a gift." "You romantic fool," Natalie said affectionately, but she was crying happy tears. "I love you so much, James Thatcher. And I love you, Mrs. Thatcher, for 20 years and for 20 more and for however many we're blessed with after that." They returned to the ranch refreshed and even more connected than before. The children teased them about acting like newlyweds, but James and Natalie didn't care. They had learned that love wasn't just the passionate beginning but the steady, daily choice to honor and cherish each other. As the new century approached, the ranch continued to thrive. Joseph and Sarah presented them with their first grandchild, a boy they named James after his grandfather. Natalie held little James and felt her heart overflow. She thought of Esther, wishing her grandmother could have seen this, but feeling her presence nonetheless. Llano eventually returned from school with a teaching certificate and opened a small school in Llano, educating the children of ranchers and townspeople alike. Anna married one of the ranch hands, a good man named Daniel, and they stayed on the ranch, building their own house on the property. Catherine became the town's official doctor when the old doctor retired, the first female physician in the county. The twins had made their family proud beyond measure. As James liked to say, they might have been a surprise, but they were the best kind of surprise. On New Year's Eve, as the 20th century gave way to the 20th, the entire extended family gathered at the main ranch house. Children ran through the rooms while adults talked and laughed. Food covered every surface in the kitchen and dining room. Music played on the new phonograph that had been a Christmas gift. Natalie stood in the doorway, watching the celebration, and felt James's arms wrap around her from behind. "Look at what we built," he murmured in her ear. "All of this came from one mail-order bride advertisement and a lot of faith." "And a grandmother who refused to be left behind," Natalie added with a smile. "And a grandmother who refused to be left behind," James agreed. "I'm glad every day that I said she was welcome. I'm glad for all of it." As midnight approached, the family gathered together, counting down to the new century. When the clock struck 12, James pulled Natalie close and kissed her soundly while their children cheered and whistled. "To the next 100 years," James said softly. "To family," Natalie replied. "To love," James added. And as the new century dawned, the Thatcher ranch stood strong, a testament to what could be built when love, determination, and family came together. From desperate beginnings in a dusty Texas town, Natalie and James had created a legacy that would endure for generations. All because a lonely rancher had looked past convention and welcomed not just a mail-order bride, but her grandmother too, saying with simple grace that she was welcome here as family. Their story became the stuff of family legend, told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The story of how Natalie had arrived scared but hopeful, how James had shown kindness when he could have turned them away, how Esther had made a home in a strange land, and how love had flourished against all odds in the wild Texas frontier. Years later, when both James and Natalie were old and gray, sitting together on their beloved porch watching yet another sunset paint the sky, Natalie would think back to that first day. How she had stood in the dust of Llano, terrified and desperate, holding her grandmother's arm and hoping for the best. "No regrets?" James asked, as if reading her thoughts. He often seemed to do that after so many years together. "Not a single one," Natalie said firmly. "Everything turned out exactly as it should have. Even the hard parts, she confirmed. They made us stronger. They made this sweeter." James raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture he had performed thousands of times over their decades together. "You made me believe in fate, you know. I never thought much about it before, but there's no other explanation for how perfectly things worked out. You were meant to answer that advertisement. Esther was meant to come with you. I was meant to welcome you both. All of it was meant to be." "I think you're right," Natalie said softly. "I think we were always meant to find each other, even if it took a newspaper advertisement and a long journey across the country to make it happen." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars they had watched together for over 40 years. The ranch around them was quiet now, settled for the night. In the distance, they could see the lights from their children's homes, from the bunkhouses, from the small community they had built. "Thank you," James said suddenly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to come here, for bringing Esther. For taking a chance on a lonely rancher who had no business thinking he deserved someone like you." James turned to look at her, his eyes still as blue as the summer sky despite his age. "For loving me, for building this life with me, for everything." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming gratitude and love. "Thank you for welcoming us, for seeing past the inconvenience of an unexpected grandmother, for being patient and kind and honorable, for becoming my best friend as well as my husband, for giving me the family I had lost and a home I never knew I needed." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held decades of love and partnership and mutual respect. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. "I love you, Natalie Thatcher," James said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, James Thatcher," Natalie replied, "always and forever." As the night deepened and the cool breeze whispered through the trees, they remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts joined, watching over the legacy they had built together. A legacy of love, family, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the bravest leaps of faith. And somewhere, Natalie felt certain, Esther was watching over them all, smiling at the family she had helped create, proud of the granddaughter who had been brave enough to answer an advertisement and the rancher who had been kind enough to say, She's welcome here as family too.